This gentleman you will know, many of you will know already, Dr. Hussain Gandhi, as a king of tech, I would say, in the GP world. He's going to tell you a bit about himself in detail in a second, but a lot of you guys will know him as Dr. Gandalf. That's how he tends to be on most of his social media channels, and I'll go through those no doubt in a second. He's a GP partner and a trainer in Nottingham, and now widely known as a digital GP and someone who is at the forefront of all things tech when it comes to general practice and in particular GP training. I think a lot of GP trainees are very good at picking up new tech features and things that can make their job a little bit easier, and I'm sure we're going to go through some of those in detail in a second. He's a national representative to the RCGP Council, and he owns eGP Learning, and does some super stuff that I know a lot of trainees use in preparation for exam, particularly since RCA came about with video recording, but also for many other aspects and features as well. So we're going to call on Hussain. Are you there, Hussain? Now, Hussain, welcome. Firstly, thank you so much for coming on board, because if anyone is going to come on and talk about tech, then we had to get you on. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a poll before we start, just so we can get an idea of the audience and where they are in their technology use, and that hopefully can guide you a little bit in terms of how to pitch the talk at. So guys, if you can just click something here. How much are you using technology to enhance your training currently? Okay, so saying the majority, I use some tech, but would like to be able to use more. We've got about 10% who want to avoid technology as much as possible, and we've got around 15, 17-ish% of those who are probably at your level when it comes to technology. So with that, let's hand you over, Hussain, and take it away.
So thank you for that, Aman, and thank you everybody for joining us. I know joining a conference on Saturday sometimes can seem a bit challenging, but as you can see, and I know you've already had some amazing content, and hopefully I'll be able to show you some extra things that will help you manage kind of your digital GP life. So I'm going to talk about a few different things, but just before we do, I know Aman's given me a lovely introduction, but I'm just going to cover a couple of aspects. More of you probably know me as this weird little moniker that you can see here. And that's because that's what I look like on social media and various different platforms and other things that you can see. In terms of my main job, however, I work here. So this is Wellspring Surgery in St Anne's, and it's pretty much where I spend most of my time. So I do 6 sessions still clinically, although I can guarantee you it feels a hell of a lot more than that. In addition, I also do 2 sessions as a PCN clinical director for Nottingham Sister Yeast. I also, as Aman mentioned, run something called eGP Learning, which I call it more of a platform. And that's because we pump out content to various different places, YouTube, our podcast, and almost every social media platform going, although I think Aman still pips me a little bit on that part. And in addition, I create content that looks like this. So here's a selection of the various videos and stuff that you may want to have a look at, specifically those in training or thinking about training or just coming out of training. I'm going to show you some more towards the end that are definitely worth your while. And I also do a couple of other things as well. So I run something called System 1 Facebook user group, which if you're a System 1 user, highly recommend joining. You'll find a community of people that just basically want to help you use System 1 a lot better and more effectively. And I do various other things. So I'm still technically the treasurer for GP Survival, although handing that over to other places, local LMC rep, national representative to RCGP Council. And I also edit the podcast for Innovate that some of you probably listen to, or hopefully do listen to. But absolutely, my last little thing is I'm a geek. I love pretty much anything to do with board games, comics, and various other things, and that tends to come through in some of my passions, and particularly the videos, including our recent thing, Board Game Medics. But today, I'm going to talk to you about being a digital GP, and this clearly has been a focus for many people, particularly since this time last year when everything just kicked off and we changed basically general practice in the space of about 3 weeks. With absolute certainty, one of the things that's happened with that is this new concept of total triage. Now, for some practices and some clinicians, this hasn't been a huge shift, but for the majority, it absolutely has, in terms of how we now access and assess patients in a completely different way. Some of that will be through online routes, through online consultations. More commonly for majority of people, and approximately 80% of consultations currently happening this way, would be through the telephone route. And there's various different ways that that can help and possibly hinder how you deliver consultations to patients. In addition, we've started to see an increased shift to other types of consultations as well, so video consultations, and there are particular parts where that can be really effective, as well as virtual clinics, so being able to deliver telehealth and telemedicine through other routes as well. And then finally, we're going to see an increased expansion to one area that some of you may not have had a great deal of experience with yet, but I can guarantee you in the next couple of years it's going to be something we'll see more of, and that's video group clinics, or group clinics, hopefully, when face-to-face also improves a little bit more. And I think these are new consultation styles that you need to be aware of, and as I said, some of you also start to engage with these as we move forward with general practice. I think when it comes to remote and video consultation, there are a couple of structure elements I like to encourage to people. So here's the main ones in terms of one thing. Whenever you're doing these kind of consultations, look at your preparation, and that splits up into 3 parts: place, person, and time. In terms of the place, it's obviously things like logistics, where you're going to do the consultation from. Is that in practice, where technically you've got a lot more secure equipment and hopefully should be provided with all the equipment you need to do the various different types of consultations? Or is it going to be from home, which many of us have had to do over the past year in particular? So that's working remotely from home or in different locations as well, which can happen. I think it's important to remember that you have the right infrastructure to help you do that. So even considering simple things like your internet connection, how are you going to make the phone calls to patients? You can be sharing your telephone number. That's some things that people don't often think about until they start doing it. And also how you're going to manage interruptions, all those other kind of things that may happen because you're at home, which wouldn't normally happen the same way in practice. In terms of yourself, how are you set up personally to deliver those types of consultations, whether it's remotely, and also what kind of adjustments do you need to help you in terms of things like height settings for keyboards, comfort, ergonomics, all that kind of stuff. But also, what do you look like? One thing I often tell to most people is don't wear stripy or brightly coloured clothing, particularly check patterns and that kind of stuff, because actually if you're doing video consultations, it can be quite distracting and can cause challenges to people when you're doing it through that interface just because of screen share and that kind of stuff. And time. So you need to have the right amount of time for doing this. I'm sure many of you have realised that telephone consultation and video consultations are not quicker than face-to-face. They can be, don't get me wrong, but they can be just as long and sometimes even longer, depending on how you do that. And also the interim parts in terms of how you set up the consultations that transfer over from one type to another. So if you're going from online consultations to telephone, online consultations to face-to-face, to video, and in between those as well, how are you going to manage that, and also the time it takes for you to do those aspects. In terms of the structure of these types of consultations, they're all a little bit different. There are some definite tools, but different parts I always recommend people think about is the start, how you're going to do things during the consultation, consider how you're going to end it, and also think about the various resources you may need to help you manage those consultations a lot more effectively. I'm not going to talk in more detail about that particular part of remote consultations, purely simply because I've got some resources that will help. One thing I will mention, however, particularly with it being On Your Feet Britain in a couple of weeks, definitely think about standing desks. As many of us have now started doing more remote work in particular, and also spending a lot more time at the telephone, it's important to remember that you're being active in your clinical practice, and one great way of doing that is standing desks in particular. Really good for ergonomics and physical health and that kind of stuff, and actually gives you more energy. Don't believe me? Give it a try. Overall though, a couple of tips I'm going to give you for when it comes to particularly video and remote consultations. So number one, make sure you've always tested the system you're going to be using, particularly if you're going to be locuming or if you're starting a new practice. What kind of systems is that place using compared to other places that you've been? And make sure you've given them a good test just before you've actually started going live with patients. Particularly many practices in the coming weeks or months changing the types of online providers that you're going to be using as well. That's something that's really important to have a look at. Always do a quick scan to make sure your background's okay. Definitely don't want smelly urine pots or patient notes and that kind of stuff visible in the background if you're having to do video consultations in particular. And also try and look at the camera if you're doing a video consult itself. So as you notice, throughout the majority of this talk, I've been looking directly at my webcam, which is kind of like at my eye height rather than looking down at my screen. And that's mainly because I'm hoping comes across I'm talking to you, not looking at my screen and leading to a little bit of disconnect. If you are having to do different things, whether that's through telephone or video consultation interface, explain what you're doing. It tends to lead to a much better outcome with patients and they don't think that you're ignoring them. And absolutely have resources that you can share. Things like Accurate, MJob, all those kind of platforms are amazing because you can just send stuff to patients straight away, either during or after the consultations. But in an even better way is to have those resources ready to go in templates or other kind of things to make your life a lot easier. And absolutely use similar sort of technology to help you document things effortlessly. When it comes to System 1, for me, it's things like auto consultations, protocols, templates, that kind of stuff. EMIS has similar sort of things. The synonyms part is the one thing I wish System 1 had that EMIS has, but there's other ways that you can do that as well. And we'll talk about a few of those a little bit later on. If you do want some further resources, so I'm just going to give you a few of those now. Don't worry, all this stuff you'll get access to as soon as we finish the talk. But a couple of things to have a look at. I've got a web page that goes to various different links and videos, of which these are probably the main ones that you might want to have a look at. So online consultations made easy, video consultations, definitely some tools to help you do things like accurate exam jog are coming, as well as how to examine patient through a video interface. A challenge I know many of you sometimes feel, I can't possibly do this kind of examination through a video interface. Actually, you'd be surprised how much you can actually do. And then additionally, if you do want some extra hints and tips and things, I've created a course with one of my colleagues, Ed Pooley, that's free to use. You just need to register for it. It's kind of like a 5-day challenge of how you can basically sort out remote consultations easily and effectively. We talk about various different aspects in terms of what to do when patients can't be contactable, how to deal with multiple things in one consultation, setup, and various other aspects as well. So that's kind of like the whole consultation side of things I was going to cover today. I think something that is useful to be aware of is the technology you might want to use. And one thing I'm a massive, absolute massive fan of is digital stethoscopes. So if you want some fancy tech that will help your life in general practice, this is definitely one. The stethoscope is synonymous with doctors and GPs and the way that we work, but actually just doing something as simple as adding Bluetooth. And I know adding Bluetooth is kind of like a sketch kind of thing, you know, it just seems like we can stick Bluetooth on anything that makes it better. But actually with a stethoscope, it really can. So the way that this works is a digital stethoscope that does two things. The Bluetooth enables you to transfer the audio sound to another place. And the way that you can use this is either through training, if you're not able to be in the same location as, for example, your trainer or trainee, but also clinically, it's really good for using in places like care homes. So you can leave one of these in a care home, for example, and actually get the staff to do the examination for you and transfer the audio signal across to yourself if you're working somewhere else. And that can work either from a practice perspective, or if you're looking wider, things like networks, you know, services being provided digitally and remotely completely. It's a really interesting way of being able to deliver care. The other part that I absolutely love as well is actually this comes with noise cancelling elements. So the quality of the audio, the only way I can describe it is by going from watching standard definition television to watching high definition television and then trying to go back. That's how it is, but when you're talking about the audio of what you're hearing, I mean, I can actually hear proper heart sounds and proper breath sounds with no difficulty using one of these simple stethoscopes. And they're not significantly more expensive than some of the high quality standard stethoscopes you would have seen. Alternately, we can think about other types of methods to enhance your tech. So I use a digital endoscope in practice. It's a really simple, cheap one. So it cost me about 16 quid, I believe. And I use that to kind of have a look in different orifices. Typically it's the ears, to be honest. But the reason why I use that is sometimes it just helps convince patients what the actual problem is. Now, I'll be honest, I've used this a lot less since lockdown happened and COVID and everything, because I see less patients compared to what I used to do. But the reason this happened, I had this piece of tech and I had a patient, mom brought her son. She basically said he had ear problems, and she didn't believe me when I told her that her son had managed to put a ball bearing into the ear. Point blank refused to believe me, said, no, not possible, my kid could never have done that, he wouldn't have done that, etc., etc. Tried to show her, but couldn't do it with a kind of normal otoscope and stuff, so I pulled out my digital endoscope, put it on screen and showed her, and then she actually let me try and fish it out. Unfortunately, I couldn't, still had to send the kid to A&E, but I was able to get the patient on board. Now, I know there's definitely people out there who say, well, could have just left it at that. But this kid was uncomfortable, you know, it needed dealing with. So it was a way for me to try and help the patient understand the challenges. And this can be really useful for other things, you know, various aspects in terms of wax, nasal orifice and that kind of stuff. I'm not going to suggest you put it anywhere else, to be honest, but definitely has applications. And again, as I mentioned, in terms of use within care homes and stuff, real potential there. Points of access care. So increasingly we're seeing elements of this happen, and this can blend over into different areas. We're seeing increased use of things like INR technology for point of access, even CRP and point testing kits, obviously for things like COVID and that kind of stuff. I think this is an area of medicine we're going to see an expansion in the next few years, and it's important to be aware that you're going to see more of this come through to you as a clinician in terms of different types of testing and stuff. So just to put this more on your radar, along with other aspects like teledermatology and various other technology-based uses. Teledermatology has been around for a while, but increasingly we're seeing the use of algorithms and AI to enhance this, to allow us to have more diagnostic elements, and things like dermoscopy and stuff obviously do exist already. Those are all going to be enhanced with the elements of machine learning and AI that's going to happen. But one area that I'm sure some of you have already had these types of consultations, and you'll see an increasing amount of them as the tech improves, is the use of wearables. So if you've not had the Apple Watch consultation yet, well, it's going to happen at some point, I can guarantee you that. So standard thing is the patient contacts you saying, I'm having a high heart rate on my Apple Watch, what do I do about it? Well, what do you do about it? As the technology in these kind of devices improves, we are going to see a little bit more reliance on this, and already we're seeing some elements of this being used across the area. So things like pulse oximetry monitoring for patients with post-COVID. This is the type of technology that we're now encouraging patients to use, the self-monitoring of their own blood pressure, for example. But it's recognizing what kind of devices are effective, what are sensible to use the results from, and at what point do you actually need to say, well, we need to think about other kinds of kit and stuff at that point. So that's a little bit about my tech. And hopefully that you found that useful. I'm going to now talk a little bit about the types of technology you may want to use in practice. And for me, the one device that I insist and suggest to all people they should have in practice is a smartphone, because so much of this you can now do with a decent smartphone, for example. There's various different ways you can use smartphones in practice. Obviously, teledermatology is a great one, and in terms of the ease of allowing the images to be sent to somewhere else. If you are sending it within practice and want to use that, there's definitely some platforms I would recommend you use rather than storing on the camera themselves, because obviously there's data requirements with that. So if you're using things like Pando or other kind of messaging platforms designed for doctors, Silo is another one, and Medic Bleep I think is the third one. They're really good for being able to communicate across different areas. But absolutely, things like other apps are ones you need to consider. And the one app I recommend every clinician pretty much has on their phone is the BNF app. Now, don't get me wrong, some people say, why would I need to have the BNF on my phone when I've got it in, for example, my EPR, like System 1, EMIS, that kind of stuff? Well, sometimes they don't work as effectively. The awesome thing about the BNF app as well is you can switch between the adult and the child BNF app at the click of a button. And additionally, it's a lot lighter than carrying the book when you go out on home visits and stuff. So if you are in a situation, particularly in out of hours or other kind of environments where data is an issue or access to technology can sometimes be stuttered, having it on your phone makes life a lot easier. It's really easy to use. It's absolutely my favorite clinical app going. If you wanted other apps that you wanted to either look at for yourself or more importantly recommend to patients, definitely recommend having a look at a platform called Orca, which is basically the BNF for medical health apps. It does the same job that the BNF does. It gives you information about the various different types of apps, how effective they are. They look at things like how often the apps are updated, how easy they are to read, what the validity of the content, that kind of stuff. So it's a really nice platform to use. And I actually use this to send information to patients about which type of apps I would like them to engage with as well. If you want some tips on how to work better in practice, the one I really recommend to anyone is learn to type faster. Why? Well, pretty much most of our time in practice is spent engaging with a computer. People think it's spent with patients. No, actually I spend more time on my computer than I do with most patients, and that's inputting and taking out information from the records. Now, the quicker I can put that information in, the less time I'm spending working. It's as simple as that. So finding ways to make that work better in practice is absolutely important. And typing quicker can help with that. And as you can imagine, there's a massive difference between typing the average of 30 to 40 words per minute, between typing 60 words a minute. And if you're awesome, going up to things like 80, 90, 100 words per minute. I think the record's on like 212 words per minute. That's going to be trickier to do, but definitely something to consider. If you did want tips on that, I'm actually looking at developing a course to help people learn how to type fast in general practice. However, if you're not the type of person that likes to type, if you find it just a really frustrating thing, or if you just find it mundane, Other options to look at are digital dictation, and particularly the types of tools that we have for dictation are significantly improving in terms of their efficacy and the way that they work, and just the general process and how they work and stuff. So definitely consider those if typing is something that you're just not a big fan of. Two areas that we are going to see rapid expansion in the next 5 years or so. So one is using AR and VR technology to help patients. So already VR is being used to help facilitate patients when they're looking at COPD management, group physiotherapy, and various aspects around that side of things, including reassuring patients and distracting them when they're having phlebotomy done. So those are 3 use cases that are already being trialed and used effectively across the country, and we will definitely see more as time moves on. And the last one is AI. I've mentioned this a couple of times already. Now, I'm not talking about the autonomous units that mean that they're going to take over the way that we work in terms of doing our job for us. However, one thing I definitely do believe is that AI won't replace doctors, but doctors that use AI will replace doctors. And to a degree, we already use it. We have really basic versions of machine learning that are incorporated within our systems, like the pathology results that you look at, various aspects on those lines, but using technology to help us enhance particularly the processing of information and how that works will definitely make us better clinicians. It's interesting to see how this area develops. It's not the white horse, it's not the unicorn that people thought it was going to be a couple of years back, but it definitely will, I think, help the way that we work in clinical practice as time develops. So that's those aspects I've covered so far. Just going to move on to the kind of final section, and in particular, we're going to talk about your learning. So one of the things I love to do is help people learn more effectively using tech to do that. Obviously, there's some various videos on there about how to do stuff for your RCA, which I know is relevant for many people in this group, but also thinking about the future. So once you complete general practice, looking at how you engage with the appraisal toolkits and various other ways of recording your learning, because let's be honest, we're all pretty good at learning. Most of us aren't really so good at documenting the learning that we do, so having tips and tools to help with that. I completely get that appraisal and revalidation isn't a stripped down process at this point, and hopefully, to a degree, it will stay that way because it's been a lot better, but it may change. So understanding how to do that more effectively, absolutely useful. I'm a massive fan of social media, and I think it can be an absolute force for good. It's allowed me to connect with so many amazing people in terms of the way that we work and do things, but it's also important to remember that it can be a really good learning tool, but also it can be a tool that can be misused. So understanding how to use social media more effectively is something I encourage all of you to have a look at. If you are going to use social media for things like content creation or learning, all that kind of stuff, the one piece of advice I will give you, find one platform that works best for you and stick to that. Don't be like me and be everywhere. It's really challenging. My other favorite way of learning is absolutely things like podcasts. I'm an absolute podcast nut. I listen to about 7, 8 a week at least, if not more than that, depending on how much time I've got or if I've got longer journeys, which hasn't happened as much lately because of COVID and things. But they're a great way to learn. It's the opportunity to use potential dead time, like travel time, that kind of stuff, to listen to information that you can either use to absorb or even to distract yourself to come up with thinking time and things. And there's definitely some really good, particularly clinical and non-clinical podcasts out there that you feel free to have a look at. I've got some content to help you with that. Alternatively, if you're more a visual person, definitely have a look at YouTube, vlogs, that kind of stuff. There's plenty I would recommend. Absolutely, the one I'm going to suggest to you though is the Aurora Med one. There we are. So if you don't know this, Aman recently hit a really amazing milestone of 25,000 subscribers to his YouTube channel, and it's well deserved. He's got some amazing high quality content on there as well. One thing I do think we will see the change to, and has definitely been pushed forward by COVID, is the use of blended and online learning. So in particular, online conferences and courses and that kind of stuff. I mean, how meta are we? We're in one right now and I'm talking about it. But particularly as we move out of whatever COVID restrictions we're going to have over the next few months and weeks, I think we are going to see increased use potentially of hybrid courses and conferences, which actually will be really effective ways for us to learn, but also increase the availability of these kind of learning opportunities for us as well. So do think about that. If you want more tips on how to use tech to enhance your learning, I'm more than happy to offer you some through that route as well. And that's pretty much everything we've covered in that section. I did mention that I was going to cover things in summary. So here are some of my core, kind of core tips that I would recommend that you have a look at. definitely think about your website manner, and that's what I incorporate all that stuff I talked about earlier in terms of the way you do remote consultations and the way that you engage with patients. There's so many different things that can be impacting that. So definitely having a look at the way that you can incorporate that into your daily life will actually make your life a lot easier. Definitely learn how you can put the information to the records faster, whether that's learning to type faster, whether that's using dictation tools, or whether that's just using shortcuts like macros, auto consultations, that kind of stuff will definitely make your life easier. If you are a social media person, definitely find a platform that works best for you and see how that goes, and definitely use the options from that to help you understand your learning. Podcasts and vlogs, absolutely a must for me. I tend to recommend a lot of that to people, and there are some really good ways that you can help to enhance your learning through doing those routes. And if you're after equipment, like I said, there's a few we've covered there already for you. If you do want some specific videos and contents that I've got designed for people in training, so this was a series commissioned by the GP Task Force in Derbyshire, looking at focal videos for those coming out of training and just starting out in general practice. So looking at resilience, looking at well-being, but also looking at the important things like money, which are really important. I know you're going to be hearing from Tommy and Ed a little bit later on, and they've got some awesome stuff to talk about in there, as well as just basic stuff, various acronyms in general practice, which most people don't have a clue about, myself included, because they keep changing, and then also appraisal and revalidation. And if you want some longer form content, as I said, Aman is definitely the king of short form content, but if you want some longer form stuff about things like the ARCP and the workplace assessments, got some really good content on there for you to give you a guide of what you need to do through training and that kind of stuff as well. More than happy to answer any questions that we've got, Aman. In the meantime, if you did want access to all of that kind of content that I mentioned there, if you're happy to just go to that quick short link there, or hold your cameras up and go to the QR code, it'll take you to a form. You fill that in, give me some feedback, and you get all the links to those various things, including invites to the 2 courses I mentioned. So the one about typing quick in general practice. The one I didn't quite mention was just how to start your own podcast, which I know a few people keep asking me about, and I'm running a webinar for on Wednesday for.
Brilliant. Thanks, Hussain. That's super quick, super what's the word? Targeted, and really informative. Covered a lot of ground.
Okay.
And I was surprised you could do it in 40 minutes, but you managed to with time spare as well. Super impressive. Some really good questions coming in, actually.
Absolutely.
Some follow on from what you've been saying, and some are completely different. So are you okay if we just start running through some of these? We've got about 10 minutes, actually.
Yeah, go for it.
Great. So the first one's about stethoscopes. You mentioned those. Are there any brands available? Which are the most commonly ones used in general practice?
Sure. So I think there's a variety of different ones out there. Many people obviously have Littmann as their tried and trusted kind of brand for when it comes to stethoscopes, and their digital ones are pretty good. Me personally, it's got to be the Echo though. So there's 2 created by Echo that I recommend to most people. There's the Echo Core 2, which is the one I actually use most of the time in practice. And that's basically got the noise cancellation software that I mentioned, as well as the Bluetooth, so I can send that to my computer and use it with trainees and that kind of stuff. There's the more expensive Echo Duo, which is both a combination stethoscope as well as an ECG machine. So it creates a 2-lead ECG output, so similar to the Cardi devices that many people have probably seen. So it's basically both of those in one. The only reason why I prefer the Core 2 is because I'm really bad at remembering to charge my Core Duo. So the ECG based one, it doesn't even look like a stethoscope. It looks more like a smartphone, to be honest, but it has to be charged. And I'm really bad at remembering to do that. Whereas the Core 2, the one that looks like a stethoscope, will still work as a stethoscope even if you've forgotten to charge it. So, even if you're not using noise cancelling, it will still work. So that's my personal preference and stuff.
Brilliant. Pooja?
Well, fab as always, Hussain. Thank you for that informative talk. One question that I think is a great question to ask you, and one that I'm interested in: which resources do you use to stay up to date with the newest tech updates in the UK? And what are the best products you recommend to buy for trainees?
Okay, so in terms of tech resources, to be honest, there isn't one specific one. I think it's trying to get information from various different routes. So I use things like RSS readers and that kind of stuff to help bring information to me. There's definitely companies like Health Tech newspaper, as well as the Digital Health it's called Digital Health, but it's a website and stuff. So they're really good at presenting information about the kind of new developments and that kind of stuff that's happening. In terms of tech for trainees, so I think when it comes down to whether you're focusing on the kind of the job that we're doing or the way that you're learning. When it comes down to learning, just having a decent smartphone, I think, is probably the best way, because then you can do the learning on the fly. And absolutely, podcasts for me are the best way to do that. That's how I learn better. It's through audio learning. So it's remembering that everyone learns in different ways and focusing on the routes that allow you to learn that effectively. I know Aman does some amazing work when it comes to his vlogs and that kind of stuff, as well as the email updates. And if that's the best way you learn, focus on that. If you wanted some good clinical podcasts, my personal recommendation would be the Primary Care Knowledge Boost. It's a 2-weekly update, and it's good, it's targeted, it's amazing content. In terms of actual med tech and kind of the equipment that you need in practice, so for trainees, I'm going to be really geeky here and say 2 things. So one, consider having your own keyboard. So I mentioned about typing quicker. And I'm an absolute nut when it comes to having a nice, comfortable keyboard. I've got about 7 in my clinical room. I'm that crazy about them because I love just testing them and having to play with them. But having one that actually you feel comfortable using, rather than the stock kind of Dell black weird things that we're all given and we just use, just because it makes me more comfortable and it means I can work more effectively. The second one that I've kind of used a lot with my trainees is just a proper timer. So I've got one of these weird little timer devices that changes color as it goes through the timing. So you can set it for 10 minutes, and then halfway through it goes from green when you start it, it goes to orange, and then when you've got a minute left of that 10 minutes, it goes to red. And once you've hit the 10 minutes, it flashes red. And I've used that to helping them do things like their RCA and CSA prep and that kind of stuff, in terms of understanding where they are in the consultations. But the reason why I like that over kind of like clocks and stuff is it's completely unobtrusive. You can stick it behind where the patient would sit. If you've got them in the room, you can sit it, put it on, just outside of your visual gaze, so you've got it all, it's there and you're aware of it, but it's not intruding, because it's not audio, it doesn't interfere in the consultation. It's just a nice way of doing things without having to break the flow of the consultation, which is I know what many people worry about, particularly with obviously the RCA and that side of things as well.
I think that's a super point, and it kind of leads on to a question, with 2 questions really. Have you ever had any comeback from patients who don't like certain bits of tech that you've been using, or they think it's too out there? And secondly, you mentioned e-portfolio earlier. Is there any ways that trainees can use technology to improve or make portfolio entries easier or quicker or less onerous?
Okay, I'll deal with the second one first, if that's all right. So I must admit, 14 Fish, the upgrade we've had from the previous portfolio has been leaps and bounds. So the way that it does various aspects like auto saving, you've got the much more effective app and that kind of stuff. To be honest, I used to say to people, use cloud documentation software, things like Evernote, Google Drive, that kind of stuff to record your learning, and then you can upload that afterwards. Actually, 14 Fish does a lot of that now. That's so much easier that, to be honest, just having that available to you is probably enough in terms of doing most of the trainee focused documentation. I think if you're a pen and paper person, and there are definitely people out there that prefer that, I'm not one of them, but using cam scanner apps and that kind of stuff to upload that information into PDF format, or even using the OCR technology where it reads your handwriting and then digitizes that, those can be really useful tools that you can use to then upload your learning into the portfolio, where it kind of needs to be shared from, versus where you are actually recording, documenting and stuff. Apologies, I've forgotten the first part of the question.
Just the patient comeback. Have you ever had any patients saying that's a bit too weird for me, Doc?
Yeah, so I've had a few. I think we've all had challenges more recently with patients feeling that one particular route doesn't quite work for them. And I think one of the things that's important is you always find the route that works best with the patient. So for example, I've had patients where I've been pretty convinced that what they're talking about is a fairly minor health issue, and if I just had a photo, I could give them complete reassurance. But then supporting them to even do that part has been a challenge for them. They felt that actually that's just not something they want to entertain, and that kind of thing. So the way I've tackled that is, if it's been someone that just has absolute, no, can't do this, not going to do this, fine, see them face to face, because at the end of the day, I still need to give that reassurance. Otherwise, they're just going to come back in some other route. but then taking part of that then subsequent consultation to walk through some of the other aspects and say, and you know, in that particular example, I said to the patient once I've dealt with a health issue face to face, saying, I know you're really hesitant about this. Actually, this is what I was talking about. Like, do you mind if I just show you what could have helped you? And then for future reference, it may mean it's having to save you time. It may mean you don't have to come down from wherever you are. And actually, that patient was then much more happy to do that, because what the problem was their anxiety about using the tech. That's all it was. And they were so anxious about using it, getting it wrong, that they just couldn't manage that. The other part I use, and I know I mean this before, I create loads of videos to try and help patients understand how to use the tech as well, because by doing that, it reduces their resistance and that kind of stuff to, you know, that anxiety of doing something new that's different and that kind of thing. So that can often help. I mean, I've had video consultations with 70, 80, 90-year-olds who've done it purely by themselves, because I've just walked them through the process over the phone, explained it really clearly, taken that time. It's meant that I've been able to manage them a lot more effectively from my perspective, but also make sure the patient feels happy with the consultation as well, and leading to hopefully good outcomes.
Yeah, fascinating.
Well, just one final question, Hussain. What is the best dictation device according to you?
The best dictation device is probably the one that you use, first of all. So I think there's some really good platforms out there. I must admit, I have been pleasantly surprised. So those who do watch the eGP Learning channel would have seen that more recently I did one with Crescendo, and they were showing me the newest version of the Dragon interface. And I must admit, I was quite surprised at how much better it was now compared to what it was pre-COVID and that kind of stuff. And the fact that they now, you know, that technology can be used through your own kind of hardware and stuff. You don't have to have specific devices and things like you used to. So it will work even through a bog standard microphone in a webcam and that kind of stuff now. So using things like AI to enhance that level, that that type of software is massively improving. And the fact that you can say something like a cardiology examination normal and it documents about 5 lines of text about the cardiology exam, that time-saving element, I'm pretty fast at typing, but that's much faster than me. And therefore, if you're faster, theoretically, you're going to be quicker. And obviously, as a result of that, go home sooner, which is the goal for a lot of the stuff I'm trying to help people with.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. And lots of comments coming in saying that was super useful, eye-opening, going to look more into tech. So I think your job was well done, Hussain.
Glad to hear
it. Please do look at eGP Learning, because there is so much stuff on there, and there's stuff for patients and stuff for clinicians, and it really will save you some time. There's some super stuff on there, so please do check it out when you get a chance. Hussain, thanks as always. It's been amazing.
Thank you for having me.